Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We're excited to have the Josh Bersin Company joining us today to share their latest research on financial services from the Global Workforce Intelligence Project powered by Eightfold AI. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please put them in the chat widget located at the bottom of your console. If you experience any technical difficulties, you can also place those in the chat, and our team will help troubleshoot. Today's webinar is eligible for both SHRM and HRCI credits. You will receive a follow-up email with the certification information within 48 hours after the webinar concludes. With that, I'll pass it over to our speakers, Kathy Inderez and Stella Ioannidou.
Thank you so much, and thanks for joining us. And I'm really excited to share with you our late-breaking and exclusive preview of insights on the financial services industry and how you can apply these insights both to your industry if you're in financial services, but then also if you're in any industry, how you can apply all of these insights. So what we'll do today, I'm Kathy Inderez, Senior Vice President of Research at the Josh Bersin Company, and I'll go through some of the background and information on why we're even talking about Global Workforce Intelligence Project, what it is, how it applies to any industry, and then I'll turn it over to Stella, who's going to walk you through in detail what we found out the biggest talent challenges are in financial services and banking, and then we'll wrap it up with a little bit cross-industry panel. So we'll talk about other industries and how all of these questions apply to other industries. And please do put your questions in there because we'd love to get your questions answered as well at the end of the hour. So with that, let's jump right in. So a little bit about the business background and the overall market conditions. Of course, everybody knows we're in kind of a little bit of a market slowdown, but at the same time, we're still in an incredibly tight labor environment. So incredibly tight labor environment. Everybody still has a lot of issues finding the right talent. Here we have just the highest open positions on there, and you see nurses, of course, in there, software developers, but then also retail people, truck drivers, first-line supervisors. So it's not just a tech problem anymore. It's really across industry, and blue-collar workers, knowledge workers, data scientists, truck drivers, you see all of these occupations that we have open there. And I think we're all struggling still to find people, to attract people, to retain people, and to solve our talent problems with the right skills and experiences and roles. And why is it so hard to do all of this? Well, the biggest thing that's going on right now is careers are changing. So for all of us, I think all of us are thinking more about our skills. It used to be that when you joined a great company, you stayed there for life, and then you just built your career up, basically going up in your career, and then you retired at 65. But of course now, we are thinking about careers in a very different way, in a more modular way, in a more skill-based way. And a lot of people have switched careers in the pandemic and beyond. And if you think about the younger generations, I have 2 teenagers at home, they're not even thinking about the job as their career. They say, maybe I don't want to work 40 hours. Maybe I want to work not just for one company. Maybe I just want to work in a different way and build my career and just do something that I love for a little bit, and then I go surfing, and then I do something else. So I think all of these career expectations are changing pretty rapidly as well. And why is all of this happening? So all of this from a company perspective, if you're thinking about your company, no matter what industry you're in, we've moved well beyond digital transformation. You see the timeline here that we have laid out, where in the early 2000s, of course, the internet came on board, and we all were thinking about how do we bring services online. But then we thought about, well, it's not just doing something with digital, it's transforming our business around that. And of course, we were thinking about what skills you needed were design thinking, engineering, agile, mobile skills. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and digital transformation was accelerated. Whatever we thought we'd do in 10 years, maybe we did in 10 weeks, because everybody had to do digital products, digital services, and digital transformation all at once in the pandemic. So it was really a huge accelerator. And now what's happening is every industry is transforming too. So every industry is merging and transforming and like combining with another one. Retail, if you're, for example, in retail, you also need to go into tech. And if you're in banking, and Stella's going to talk a lot about that too, every bank is thinking about being a fintech and cyber and crypto. If you're in healthcare, you also have to think about pharmacy tech and how do you do retail pharmacies and all of that. Automobile companies, of course, auto manufacturers have to think about electrical vehicles and self-driving cars. And if you think about a self-driving car, it's really not a car with a computer, it's a computer with wheels on, right? But what kind of skills and roles and experiences and organizational models you need is changing a lot on that too, because if it was that clean that you said, well, I'm just a healthcare company, I don't have to think about tech or IT cybersecurity, yes, you do. If you're in banking, you have to think about fintech and how you bring all online products to your industry, and we'll hear a lot about that too. So the roles, the skills, and the organizational models are really shifting a lot, and it's not that clean anymore. And most companies are struggling to think about even what roles do we need, and all of these roles are changing pretty rapidly. And we'll hear a lot more from Stella how that applies to banking. And what that means for all of us in HR, of course, all of the HR functions are now really interconnected. If you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example, you can't just think about that. You have to think about diversity hiring and how you mitigate bias in performance management and how you bring more equitable opportunities to people. If you think about employee experience, that also touches health and well-being and total rewards and pay and benefits and how you make the job simpler. So that touches down the job architecture. And if you think about recruiting, of course, you have to think about workforce planning and talent intelligence and retention and skill building. So all of these areas are not functional silos anymore. You can't just do them in your functional silos. You really have to think about them more holistically and systemically. And we'll talk a little bit about how we're applying that to banking as well. HR technology is, of course, an enabler to all of this, and your HR tech stack is changing a lot too. It used to be that you're thinking about HR tech as really tech for HR, but now we're thinking about every HR application as an employee-facing application. So how do we make it easier for people to access all of these systems? How do we improve the employee experience? How do we make it simpler, easier to do? How do we tailor that for where people actually work, so the work tools? And then in the middle here, you see the talent intelligence layer, and that's the layer where you get data from all sorts of different systems on skills, on job roles, and on organizational solutions from these transactional systems as well from your employee experience systems to really bring it together and see what are the roles that we need to recruit for, build for, and get our people ready for. And talent intelligence, and we have just laid out what talent intelligence is here. It is really looking inside your company, getting data from inside your company, getting data from outside your company, what jobs are changing within your company, what jobs are changing outside of your company, and of course pay and wages factors in that too, and what skills models, what are rising skills, declining skills, looking back to look forward, what credentials, what education do you need for specific roles? What content, what learning content can you provide? And how is your industry shaping? And how is everybody else doing in your industry? So if you're, for example, a pharma company, you might look at what your R&D, what skills your R&D, in R&D your competitors are using to recruit and build your skills. So all of this factors into this talent intelligence database. And what we did with Eightfold here, and you'll see this in a minute, is build on the billions of data points from the Eightfold talent intelligence database to look back in time and look forward in time and predict what the future is going to be and how you can solve your talent problems with talent intelligence. Let me tell you a little bit about the Global Workforce Intelligence Project and how we got started on that and what that even is before we turn it over to Stella to talk about financial services and banking. So Global Workforce Intelligence Project, a year ago, we just had an idea. We had an idea that we wanted to go into industry by industry into skills, roles, and job clusters, role clusters, skill trends to understand how to solve the biggest talent problems in each of these industries. And the reason why we went industry by industry is because of the industry reinvention that I just talked about, because every industry is having a lot of problems to attract people, to retain people, and to build the skills inventories, skills taxonomies are really a big thing. And then customers need something different. And Stella's going to talk about what customers need from banking in a minute. But every company is facing that. Every industry is facing that. Your customers are looking for something quite different than you've ever looked before, spurred by the pandemic. And now they're saying, well, we want to continue doing all these online transactions. We want to do digital services, continue to do that, because we could do it in the pandemic. And employee expectations, of course, have shifted a lot too. People were thinking about, how come I could work remotely for 2 years in the pandemic? I want to continue doing that. Hybrid work, of course, is still a big, big topic for a lot of companies. And the way that we're doing this project, this Global Workforce Intelligence project, is we bring together a number of insights. So we bring in the insights from us, from the Josh Bersin Company, where we know what works in all of these practices: talent acquisition, how you recruit people, employee experience and retaining people in a new way, learning and development, and organization and work design. We have big studies on each of these topics, so we bring those to the table to understand what actually works and what makes the biggest difference. We also build, of course, on the Global Talent Intelligence platform from Eightfold, where they have billions of data points on skills, look at time series on skills and roles, which is really, really important. So not just knowing what the skills and the roles are today, but looking back in time, 10, 15 years, to predict the future and see what's trending up, what's trending down, and what actually is adjacent to each other. And Stella is going to explain how this works for banking in a minute. And then we also work with consultants, consulting companies, large consulting companies that have an industry offering, just to validate what we're seeing in all of these data points is actually what a lot of their clients see. And then we also bring, very, very importantly, what we call C-suite counsel, CHROs, real-life experience. Stella interviewed, I think, 20 or 25 CHROs in banking on their biggest talent issues and validated, basically, got the stories what actually works. So real-life examples is not just a theoretical kind of exercise. It's really something that works and is proven in actual practices and solutions that work in real life. And so here's what we are going to unpack, and Stella's going to talk a little bit about that. You see actually already the banking example here, where we're looking at job roles and job clusters, what jobs and roles go together, what skills dynamics we see, what trending skills, what skills are next to each other, adjacent to each other. And that's really important, because if your skills close to each other, you can actually build talent and build capabilities much quicker. And then what career pathways we see, what talent solutions we see working in the industry. And we found out that industry by industry, these solutions that actually work are pretty different. And we'll explain a little bit more about that when we talk about the cross-industry insights. So with that, Stella, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you walk us through the banking story.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Good evening, everyone. Good morning or global greetings, depending on where you're joining us today. So we're starting with a bold statement around what we found in banking, that we figured out that the digital transformation of banks is actually a talent challenge. So, but before we go deeper into that, let's see what we mean by banking, because there's a lot of under financial services, there's a lot of players, there's a lot of different stuff going on. So when we say for the needs of this study, banking, we are referring to consumer banks. So these are, and if you're wondering, like, okay, how big is this industry? This is actually pretty big. It's a $26 billion global industry. Top 100 banks are everywhere around the world. And this is a global study. We've interviewed banks from all around the world, representing every continent. And 1 in 1,000 of the people you meet, currently work in banking. And if we think about consumer banks, they're considered the primary drivers of the economy, and they're very structurally complex and stable organizations. They are experts at understanding and managing risk, and they love, let's say, stability and knowing where they stand. So when we first started looking into the industry, we, of course, came across all the digital trends and the digital technologies and tools and options that are now made available to consumer banks. And, from the way that banks are connecting to each other to the way that they offer payment services and manage their data or secure their data pools, we've seen that a lot of technology is coming into banking and helping banks kind of rethink how they could do stuff around the services that they offer to their clients. And all this, let's say, technological upheaval is actually causing what we saw like a market convergence. And we saw two stories around market convergence. Of course, there's fintechs, which are small technologically enabled companies that offer a pocket, a digitized, part of a financial product or service. It could be like they offer mobile account opening or a credit card or something like that. They're across the world. There are many examples of them who are now unicorn stage. So this pressure from all the blooming fintechs is actually causing consumer banks to, kind of compete to retain their customer base. So they're feeling pressure to maintain their customers. But these are not the only players that are coming into the financial services, consumer banking. Actually, we're seeing an increased movement from big retailers and big tech companies and telecommunication companies. Everyone who has the tech stack to support offering a digital product around or service around banking seems to be moving into that direction. So we're seeing Walmart doing checking accounts now, or we see Amazon building a payments ecosystem. And meanwhile, consumer banks globally are witnessing their return on equity declining since 2008, and their cost of income ratio remains relatively low. It's like for every dollar that they make, 50 cents at the cost they make. So that's pretty high. And Kathy also mentioned this, that the stages that the industry is at, and most of the banks are somewhere around their digital transformation journeys. They were well aware of the pressure in the market. They had their roadmaps ready. They had their 5-year or 10-year digital transformation plans ready, set. However, many of them were heavily disrupted by the pandemic. And what the pandemic did for consumer banks is a very interesting thing. It shifted the consumer behavior into expecting things that they didn't expect so fast or so much in the past. So consumers started thinking, hey, if I can do my grocery shopping, or if I can cover all my purchase needs online or through my mobile phone, why can't I do the same and meet my financial needs like that? And we've seen that many banks, the majority of them across the globe, are deeply challenged to address this new type of pace in the demand. And if we were like to summarize what's going on in the industry, like the headlines, we're seeing that the physical banking outlets, let's say the physical branches, they're not people's first choice anymore to cover their banking needs. They really don't want to go to a branch for banking. They're expecting great digital experiences, the way that they acknowledge and experience them from other types of services. However, many banks are challenged to address those, let's say, high-tech services and meet those needs, because they rely on legacy enterprise technologies that in many cases are nowhere near to be modernized. And this actually impacts how banks are able to attract talent, to retain talent, and to compete for talent in a converging market. So if we're to say, what are the 5 things that we figured out through our work on the Global Workforce Intelligence Project in banking, it would be like, we figured out that banks need, it's not a nice to have thing anymore. They really need to offer compelling digital customer experiences in order to compete in the market and remain relevant. And most banks are still missing key tech capabilities within them to be able to offer those digital experiences that their clients wanted. By tech capabilities, we don't just mean software engineering or infrastructure people. We also mean the user interface designers, the user experience designer, the product owners, the testers, everybody working around the product management lifecycle. And we did figure out, we did find out through our research and our discussions that in order for you to develop those next-gen, let's say, capabilities, you need to work, it's an inside job, right? You need to intelligently find ways to grow this talent from within, and this heavily impacts the ability to recruit and retain the talent. And we've actually went out and found some banks who are actually great at this. We call them trailblazer banks. They have a forward-looking, let's say, talent mix. They do have the tech capabilities that differentiate them from the others, and they are able to attract and retain the suitable tech talent. And we will see in a bit how they're doing that. But as a final, let's say, fifth finding is that you cannot just expect to figure this out without data, right? This has to come using a way to combine the data and the insights through a talent intelligence approach in order to navigate those strategic decisions that you need to make around talent. So let's go and see how we started and how our train of thought, our researcher, let's say, journey was. So first we wanted to see and find evidence around, okay, we know what skills and what are the next generation, let's say, skills and capabilities. How ready, however, are consumer banks to offer those? And we actually looked through the eightfold talent intelligence pool of some billion data points that we used, that in most cases, consumer banks are not ready, which means that they do not have the tech skills, the future-looking tech skills that they need to remain, to be able to compete and create those new digital experiences. The existing tech skills are either stable or declining, which means that we took the time series on the last 20 years that Eightfold is providing us with, and we saw that they're either stable or declining. They will not be around. They will not be relevant anymore in the market for the next 5 years. And it will actually take them 3 to 5 years to upskill existing staff to get those skills. And banks know this. Consumer banks are well aware of this. And we looked into the numbers of how they're addressing this. And we uncovered two primary strategies. These are US numbers. So the primary strategies, of course, go out and try to hire the people that have the skills that you need. And who are those people? These would be, they're looking to hire skilled technologists with banking experience. And they're really pushing down that strategy. We're seeing 30% year on year, almost 30% increase in the job postings for tech talent from banks. And they're trying also to increase their advertised wage to be, let's say, more appealing to prospect employees. This is the primary strategy. And the secondary strategy that we're also seeing is they are trying to acquire a fintech or merge or partner with a fintech and, kind of bring the technology in. And this, of course, is not a long-term strategy. This only modernizes a pocket of their offering, but still, it's a way for them to quickly acquire some of the skills and the talent that they need. And in other cases, also, we've seen as an additional strategy, they're outsourcing to access talent. So what this means is that they're not outsourcing some of their, let's say, older tech in order for them to build new tech, but they're actually outsourcing the new part that they want to modernize to someone who has better tech and better talent that they can work on. So we've built let's say, an approach to try to understand this and try to group and explain the strategies that come and play. And we have coined this approach that we call the systemic HR approach. And what the systemic HR approach does is that it presents groups, let's say, all types of strategies that organizations can apply in order for them to address their talent-related challenges. And as you will see from the graph, it's from left to right, the impact increases, and from top to bottom, the speed to implement actually decreases. So if we were to understand the state of play in talent-related strategies for consumer banks, we would say that, hey, they're overemphasizing on the recruitment quadrant, right? They're trying to hire as much as they can, and they are trying different types of different ways in order for them to achieve this. So we looked at the numbers and say, okay, what's the viability of that strategy? How many of those, let's say, forward-looking technologists with banking experience are there out there? And these are U.S. numbers, and we actually saw that this perfect profile does not really exist. There's actually a huge, a huge problem, a huge gap in that demand of, the right talent with the right mix of skills. And many consumer banks have become aware about that, and they're reshifting their recruitment strategy into broadening up the talent pool. They say, okay, we cannot find the perfect, let's say, technologists with banking background. Let's just open up the talent pool and try to hire next-gen skilled technologists. But what that does, it's actually placing consumer banks in a position to compete for talent with a variety of different industries. And we saw the numbers, and we've seen that they're out there competing with consulting firms, many of whom are offering services to banks, staffing firms, many of whom are outsourcing people to banks, IT service provider and big tech providers, aerospace and defense, insurance companies. So if you're a tech, let's say, professional out there, and you have your attention span, you have all those options, there's at least 8 different industries with rich value propositions and a lot of flexibility until you start considering a career in consumer banking. And then we asked ourselves, okay, are consumer banks emphasizing on the recruitment strategy because this is their most mature part? This is like the strategy they're great at. And we went back to our proprietary data. Remember, Kathy also mentioned this, that we have, through our definitive guides, a rich body of knowledge about all the HR-related practices and strategies. So we are actually able to compare and contrast industries. So banking, if you see on the recruitment angle, is actually at par with the market when it comes to recruiting. There are other areas where consumer banks are actually much better than the market. There's great opportunity for them to focus there more, like retention and reskilling and redesign. And here is where talent intelligence comes at play. Here's where you actually need to go and crunch the number really hard and figure out what's going on, which roles, which skills, and which solutions, which talent solutions we actually need to apply. And this is what we did. So we found out, remember the trailblazer banks, the banks who are great at this, the banks who are not challenged right now to attract and retain talent. And we applied a different analytics and figured out different ways to try to understand how they are different talent-wise. So first, we looked at where they place their talent. So, okay, on the organization, around the organization, where do trailblazer banks place talent differently compared to traditional banks? And what we saw is that they have more people on IT and IT-related roles, right? More people in IT operations and less people in middle and back office. And if you see the two charts, it's like IT operations is 15%, trailblazer banks is 20%, and you will say, okay, it's 5%. But if you think that the average U.S. bank has 70,000 employees, this is actually 3.5 thousand more people in IT. So let's say, for starters, that they have more people in the right positioned in the right places around the organization. And then we went our trail of thought a bit further and said, okay, how about the type of role? So what type of people do they actually place? And we actually saw that, of course, as expected, they have more senior people in their IT departments and then their software engineering department. They have 7.6 more senior software engineers who are experienced in order to help create new digital solutions. But it's not just about tech. They also have more people in roles that help transform and rethink how the bank works. We see more people in transformation roles and less people in operation and frontline roles. And this comes as no surprise because trailblazer banks scaled down their physical branches, their physical touch points. So they need less of those roles anyway. And what was explicitly exciting, at least for my perspective, is we found that in tech in particular, trailblazer banks have much less IT managers. They operate under leaner structures. Many of the trailblazer banks that we've interviewed have actually shared with us that between a software engineer and the CIO, there intervenes only one additional layer. So it's you, your talent lead, and the CIO. They are smaller, leaner teams that are self-organized, and they're able to create and have the autonomy and agency to create those software solutions. So what we know so far, we know they have, trailblazer banks have more people where they need them. They have more of the right people. And now what about skills? And we actually defined the trailblazer banks actually have 1.4 times more of those forward-looking technology skills compared to traditional banks. And if you're wondering what that may look like, it's every skill and ability, that technical ability that allows them to create better and more modern user interfaces, better analytics to understand what's going on with our customers and monitor their behavior and predict the next best thing. Also, better ways to combine and compare data and larger, let's say, storage facilities in order to be able to aggregate all the data and predict correctly. So what we've seen a series of good practices and good strategies across quadrants. And of course, there's still stuff on the recruitment. You will never, consumer banks will never stop recruiting. Right? They will keep going to find the talent that they need. But this is one part of the equation. We're seeing amazing stories from banks who are actually working diligently on aligning their skill taxonomy as foundation for all their talent-related and learning abilities. We see a lot of capability academies and talent marketplaces shaping reskilling. We see a lot of work under the retention with through career growth opportunities and the provision of flexibility and internal mobility. And of course, we see a lot of work on redesigning the ways that work is being done and automating low value and redundant tasks. But if we were to summarize, let's say, the gist of the strategies of those trailblazer banks is that these are consumer banks that work and focus more on teams rather than hierarchy, on growth rather than promoting people as a growth path. They organize around the work that needs to be done, not necessarily the jobs that are available, and they work to strengthen the culture and the employee experience. And of course, Kathy has also mentioned this, that we do have deep dive definitive guides on each and every one of those quadrants that actually help and explain exactly how to implement these strategies and how critical they are, and the bolts and pieces, if we were to say, about bringing them to life. But before, like a little bit of extra insight before I bring it on to Kathy, is that the problem that we're describing, the talent challenge of consumer banks, is not a CHRO issue. This is not something that the chief people officer, the chief people executive could just take on their own and start addressing it. And it's not a project. It needs alignment from the entire senior executive team, sponsorship from the chief executive officer to make sure that the sponsorship, the agency, and the enablement are there and they're aligned, because this is not a talent problem, a talent challenge. This is a business challenge that can be solved through talent. And if you're wondering how to do that, how you can bring that to your own organization by following the same logic that we followed for the entire industry, it actually boils down to these 6 steps. Like building a cross-functional team, a center of excellence from people from all quadrants, all throughout the HR organization, to try and understand what is the critical challenge to focus on. And once you understand and you clarify what the critical talent challenge to focus on, you go back and you analyze the roles and the skills and the organizational trends to determine which solutions fit the problem that you're trying to address. And then, of course, prioritize, because you can't do everything at the same time, but you will have an intelligent way to see and plan your way and plan out the steps that will help you achieve this, and also support as you continuously monitor progress. So this is the story from the financial services. And we are obsessed with the story. We do believe that you could do this for your organization. And Kathy, back to you.
Thank you, Stella. And before we go into questions, I just want to call out again, this is a really, really big deal, because what we did then, what Stella did then, thank you, Stella, for walking us through this in like just a few minutes. This is kind of a very, very broad-based, like half-year or 8-month study. So it sounds very clean, it sounds very simple, but to get to a simple story like this, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get into all the data points, understand the skills, understand the roles, cluster them, and see how you identify even what's the biggest talent problem and then how to solve them. So I know we'll get to the questions in a little bit, but let me talk a little bit about how you can apply this, even if you're not in financial services, if you're in any kind of industry, how you can apply all of this thinking. So one way to think about that is we looked at different talent problems, and we actually studied now 2 industries. We studied healthcare. We talked about this in the last webinar. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute. We looked at healthcare industry and we looked at the banking industry, and they have 2 different talent problems. So in banking, you just heard it's a skills gap. It's not that they don't have enough people, they don't have enough of the right people. They don't have the right skills, they don't have the right roles, because skills and roles are changing really rapidly, and the banks can't keep up with that. So the solution to that, as Stella described, is the charts, the pie charts, how you compare the trailblazer banks to the traditional banks. You need to change the talent mix. You have to have people in different roles, right? You have to have more people in tech roles and less people in the front line, like teller roles, those kind of roles. So changing the talent mix, because what we call skills velocity. So the skills and roles are changing rapidly, and it's what we call high skills velocity. Addressing that skill gap, need to change the talent mix, I should say. So that was that story. I'll tell you just a few words about the healthcare study. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but the other study, the other industry we covered early on, and we talked about that at length in our last webinar with April, was healthcare. So we said, why healthcare? Healthcare is a very massive, it's the biggest industry in the US. 1 in 7 people is actually working in healthcare. 20 million people are working in that. Very, very complex industry. And also, most impacted maybe in the pandemic and beyond. They have, no surprise to anybody, you saw this also on the slide that I shared earlier, nurses is always the #1 open job in the US, like 800,000 nursing positions are open at any time. So when we looked at the skills and the roles in healthcare, we called this a medium skills velocity. So skills and roles are changing somewhat, but not a whole lot, because in the end of the day, for healthcare, for your clinical workers, you mostly need clinical skills. Yes, you need some forward thinking, maybe tech skills as well to use AI or robotics or anything else. But for the most part, what you need first and foremost is clinical stuff, right? All the clinical capabilities. And of course, they change all the time, care protocols and all of that. But what they identified there in healthcare, it's not so much a skills gap as a capacity gap. So it's literally, there's just not enough people. So what we did in healthcare is we quantified that capacity gap. We predicted that actually in the next 2 or 3 years, 1 in 3 nursing positions will be open. So that's like 2.1 million nursing gap if we keep going how we've been going. So it's not something that you can solve by just recruiting more nurses and retaining more nurses, because a lot of them are going to retire. Average age of the nurse is 52. A lot of them left healthcare altogether in the pandemic because the job is just really, really hard to do, and it's very demanding, and it was, of course, extremely stressful in the pandemic. And it's also not something that you can just reskill people to. And the reskilling solutions actually in healthcare were different than in banking. In banking, we heard from Stella, there's a lot of talent marketplaces and capability academies where you have people just take an assignment, maybe take a class, develop some new tech skills. Well, in healthcare, you can't just do that. You don't want to be treated by a nurse that just took an online class, right? So it's a lot of certifications, career pathways, free education, how you help, for example, a receptionist in healthcare to be a nursing aide, or somebody who is in a lower paid job to build that career with free education. That was the kind of the killer app in reskilling in healthcare. And so what we identified there is from the 4R model in healthcare, it's not so much about increasing the capacity, but decreasing the demand for talent. So redesigning work, redesigning jobs, bringing in automation, augmentation, lower level people basically to do kind of these hard to fill nursing roles. That was the most impactful solution there. So it's a different problem, different solutions. And then, so you probably have all of these problems in your company, right? If you think about, you have skill gaps, probably some population where you have skill gaps. You can apply that thinking in banking. If you have a capacity gap, you literally just don't have enough people. You can apply the thinking that we applied in healthcare. And if you have an alignment problem, you have enough people, you have enough of the right people, but they're working on the wrong things. How can you help prioritize and align people to the most important work? So it's not so much about building more skills or building capacity, decreasing demand, but alignment, performance management, those kind of things might be the killer solutions there. So whatever your talent problem is, and again, you'll probably see all of them, you can apply that thinking to that. So that's kind of a little bit of what we wanted to share with you, and I think we can go to the questions. And Stella, I'll just bring some of the questions up for you, and maybe we'll go back. Do we have another slide on the 4R model? Maybe. Did we put that in? Yes, we do.
Yeah,
maybe we'll bring that up. We have some great questions. Did you want? I'll address some of the questions. I saw a lot of questions to explain a little bit more why we selected banking, how we selected what we focused on for this study. So you want to tell a little bit more? There were some questions about, is insurance part of that? Why not something else? Why did you select consumer banking? So you want to talk about that first, Stella?
Sure, happy to. So the financial services is a wide sector, right? It encompasses a lot of things, a lot of different players. And when you start to look at the sector and the talent challenges that are most prevalent, the talent challenges are not the same across the sector. So it was a way for us to understand the sector better by looking into, let's say, subsegment by subsegment, what the most prevalent talent challenge is. Because, for instance, the investment banks have a totally different talent-related challenge. The insurance companies have different talent-related challenges. So if we were to address the entire sector, it would be too generic. So we focused on one part of the industry. And mind you that the Global Workforce Intelligence Project is not, it's an ongoing study, it's an ongoing work. We will keep uncovering parts of the industry. We will keep sharing what's working and what's not, what strategies are being uncovered, and what stories are working. So through our collection, because for every one of those studies, we have a collection of resources, we will gradually add additional stories and additional challenges. But do clarify, this does not include, and I think I also answered to that question privately, thank you for asking, it does not include insurance companies. The data, I mean, this didn't come, we didn't interview insurance companies, and this does not come from investment banks at this point. So another question that I see that we need to address is like, what defines a trailblazer bank? And thank you for bringing that back to order. So the trailblazer bank profile, they're actually banks who are able, consumer banks, who are able to offer great digital experiences to their clients. They have actually managed to increase their return on equity. They see their profits rising, their return on equity rising. They are optimizing and automating a lot of their that are of lower value in order for them to reshift attention to tasks of lower value. And they have incorporated some degree, if not around the entire organization, but some degree of flexibility or agility in the way that they work. These are the primary characteristics, and we actually looked that these banks not only, let's say, have a different talent mix and excel financially, they're also recognized, they're awarded, they are employers of choice, and they're not out there even actively trying to hire, let's say. They find it, they're employers that people want to go and work for. So this is the profile of the Trailblazer Bank.
Yeah, and I love that you explained the Trailblazer Bank, and I didn't mention it. In healthcare, we did the same thing. So we looked at what we called advanced healthcare organization as well, and we saw that they have a different profile as well. So they are prioritizing the redesign of work. So they have a lot of more people that are in these like Lean Six Sigma transformation workforce workshop facilitator, those kind of roles as well as having more tech roles, and they already need 20% less nurses. So we did a similar analysis on that too, and it was a similarly interesting story to see. Not only do they have more tech people, but they also have more transformation people, and that's why they need less operations people and less nurses. And I saw another question coming up on the principle of top of license. I'll explain that a little bit because it came up in healthcare, but then Stella, I'd love to get your thoughts on financial services as well, or banking. So the principle of top of license actually comes from healthcare. So in healthcare, and I used to work in healthcare for 8 years as well, so it's an industry near and dear to my heart as well. In healthcare, the principle of top of license is actually a really big deal, and what it means is that you work mostly on things, most of the time, that you are uniquely qualified for. So in nursing, for example, it means most of the time you work on nursing things that only you as an RN, for example, can do, and not on other things that somebody else that is lower qualified, has lower experience, lower certifications can actually do. In healthcare, what we found out is nurses, in some organizations, only spend 40 or 50% of their time working on top of license. So they do nursing kind of things, caring for patients, providing actual care, only 40 to 50% of the time. And the rest, they, do charting, they do discharge procedures, they give medication where either somebody lower skilled, lower level person, like a nursing aide, for example, could provide that discharge procedure to tell people that's what you do when you get out of the hospital, or a medication robot could give the medication because they've been existing for 15 years. But in order to do that, you got to redesign the workflows, because what happens in a lot of the hospitals is these medication robots are standing in a corner because they're not integrated in the workflows. And so the nurse is doing all the things because they're already there. They're cleaning up the mess if somebody gets sick. They're giving the medication. They're giving the discharge procedures because you think they're already there. That's not what you should be doing if you have already not enough people. And Stella, anything you want to say on top of license? So top of capability might be the right.
Yeah, so the analogy for the technologist profile, right, and in consumer banking is like, are they operating, are they working on their on the peak of their tech capability? Are they actually working on things that help them grow as professionals and as technology experts? So we have an interesting question that says it's about Trailblazer banks. Are they utilizing more, same, or less remote teams of tech skilled talent? So this was a theme that actually, and also answers an additional question around flexibility for tech profiles in Trailblazer Bank. So we did see that direct correlation around flexibility and retention. It's a core characteristic of what not just those roles, but most roles, most people who are knowledge workers expect this type of flexibility to be able to work from any place that they can provide, let's say, the work that can be done, or to have some flexibility or some space around when or where the work is being done and the value is being generated. And we have seen that the banks who are great at this, the banks who get it, don't necessarily have very rigid practices at the enterprise level saying, hey, 3 times a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or something like that. They allow that flexibility at the team level. So the manager and the direct team get to decide what flexibility means for them and how it can be applied. And this is a very strong part of the retention strategies that they operate that appears to be super critical and important for tech talent. So I see another question also about onboarding early career talent. And this was a great, we saw great examples around, onboarding newer professionals, either by, of course, direct affiliations with universities. But this is a standard practice. This, used to happen for a very long time. This is not something new. What is new is that we've seen some banks who are great at this practice to actually allow for the younger generation to come in, get in a position, and then rotate for the first couple of years around different departments and different positions in order for them to get the overall, understanding of what the organization is, what the culture looks like, how we work or what we do, and then they permanently, let's say, place them to where they want to be and start supporting them career-wise. So let me check some additional questions.
One question I find interesting, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that, is I see something here that says, I love the skills revolution, but worry a little that the view of what you do, skills, experiences, ignores the who you are, traits, drivers. Do we risk over-indexing to what you do here because they are easier to observe? What do you think about that?
And that's a part of philosophical question, right? And I'm personally intrigued about that to see, because many, at least it surprised me as an industry analyst and a researcher when we interviewed many consumer banks out there who are, in general, very sophisticated organizations in some parts of the business, how they were still growing their abilities to understand and to figure out what skills are, how to derive them, how to use them as, let's say, a unit of value to connect different parts around the organization and around the talent offering. So we're still at that level of maturity around skills that's pretty, let's say, the initial level. We're just understanding what they are. And as soon as many banks are revamping their game around offering, building their taxonomies, finding their data, figuring out how do they derive the skills that the people have, because there are multiple ways in order for them to do that, but which one fits the culture and the environment of the organization. So we're still at that level that we're trying to decode skills and what they mean and how they're connected to jobs, that I don't think that the maturity is there to address, let's say, the personality parts and the how they fit to the culture part. I don't know, Kathy, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, what this reminds me of, too, is the SAP SuccessFactors whole self model, because that's exactly what they are trying to do with that whole self model. So they bring together, are trying to bring together and just change basically the whole architecture around it to say, it's not just about your skills, it's also where you want to go, who you are as a person, what is driving you, what's motivating you to feed into talent marketplaces, talent mobility, learning and development, everything else, because I think it's a really important and I think philosophical notion as well to bring both of those sides together, because in the end of the day, people are not parts, and they're not going to go where you need them to be. If they don't want to go there, they're not going to go there. They're just going to leave you. So I think the whole putting the employee into the driver's seat and giving them the tools and the resources to actually build wherever they want to build their career. I think that's what a lot of the reskilling is about as well. So it's not so much about where we need people to go, but pointing them into the right direction. These are the future roles and jobs and skills that you need. And then you pick which one you're going to want to go to based on what drives you and what motivates you. So I think that employee-centric view is very important too.
And of course, the COBOL question always pops up to remind us that a lot of the mainframe solutions in banking do rely on very old tech. And this is an interesting question, like, hey, how can we move ahead when we still rely on, let's say, older technological setups, old tech, old frameworks? And we've seen great stories from banks who actually addressed this. That actually said, took the decision, and this is a bold decision. This is why we discussed that this is a project that needs to be sponsored at the CEO level, because banks who actually addressed this heads on said, let's outsource our entire mainframe for a couple of years in order for us to focus on building the solution that we need. So let's outsource it to keep the bank running and not jeopardize our operations right now, but let's take the time while we outsource it to upskill and reskill our people and to start developing on that newer technology that is needed. So, and this is also a characteristic of the, because there's another question about like, how do we differentiate, what will banks be 5 years from now? The trailblazer banks that we've interviewed and spoken to do not identify themselves as consumer banks. They identify themselves as technology companies that happen to offer financial products and financial services. And they're actually also expanding what their product and service offering means to include other things additional to that, like all the life cycle of the government, the citizen relationship around payment and paperwork, everything around marketplace where you can buy for other services. So they're completely rethinking how their business model is by offering additional tech-enabled services. And this is a core characteristic that, of course, is not built in a day. It's not something that it's easy to implement, but we've seen from our studies that the banks who are actually great at reimagining and digitally, reshaping their capabilities are actually growing at a distance, at a speed that's separating them very swiftly from all the rest of the competition. So they're becoming, let's say, hard to catch up with. Right. So this is another core finding that differentiates trailblazer banks from traditional consumer banks right now.
This is great. There was another question on trailblazer banks, if they're rewarding managers and leaders for managing people or for people-related outcomes. Did you see that, Stella, or can you talk about that a little bit?
We have some great examples and some great stories that we captured both in the report and in our case studies. And we're seeing that in many cases, the way that the banks, let's say, appreciate the manager capabilities is through the well-being of their teams. So they are being, let's say, they are constantly looking to revamp their experience, to offer them ways to holistically make sure that they are coming to work and bringing their best selves to work. I know it may sound like a catchy phrase, but this is, they're safekeeping the entire experience, and they're taking into account multiple types of employees. They have employee personas, they do employee journeys, they understand what's going on and how needs change. Because when you started at the bank, you were 25 and you didn't care about the compensation package, or even you didn't care about, severance packages or whatever, retirement plans. But afterwards, when you went 40, you started contemplating stuff like that, and other types of, let's say, benefits became important. So they see it as holistically. They don't just say we're focusing on rewarding our managers alone. We're focusing on the experience alone. And this is the gist of the 4R framework. Everything is interconnected. Working on any piece of the system affects all the remaining parts of the system, and the strategies for that end and that aspect should be interconnected.
Fantastic, Stella. I think we're almost out of time. So do you want to just wrap it up with one thing that people should take away with, and then we'll let everybody go?
I believe that, yeah, if there's one thing to take away from today is that you need to intelligently think of the organization as a system, as an ecosystem, and plan your way around this in a systematic way. Because the complexity is fierce, the competition is fierce, and especially for consumer banks, they need to speed up the pace in order to remain relevant in the market. And thank you so much for all those questions and the discussion.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much for all the questions. Thank you, Stella, for walking us through this massive and huge study. So really appreciate it. And thank you, Eightfold team, for hosting us today. Have a good one. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.